So we'd like to welcome you, those who are regular attenders, as well as those who may be new. I met someone just this evening who's here from Washington State. So welcome to Brucker Hall. I know you're in for a real treat here this evening. I'm not going to tarry on my introduction, but I would like to introduce Mr. Loras Schissel from the Library of Congress. He's going to share with us Sousa's biography, as well as some aspects and some facets of Sousa's relationship with the Army Band. And then we'd also like for you to ask questions. So if you have questions about Sousa in particular, or really the period in which Sousa composed and performed, Mr. Schissel's a repository, a wealth of information. And so we'd love for you to ask questions if you have them. Wave your hand. I'll come around with a microphone so that we can all hear that, or I may repeat the question for the audience's benefit. But I'm going to turn it over to our subject matter expert, as we like to say in the Army. Welcome, Mr. Loras Schissel.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me at this volume? That's okay? Good. And it probably works better rather than wait at the end and then everyone's nervous when they say, and now questions, and everyone sits on their hands. If you have a question when I'm talking, just raise your hand. This is very informal. So, yes, sir. Well, I can... let me start from the very beginning, then.
Loras, can we repeat that question?
Sure.
The question was, go ahead.
Oh, the question was Sousa in the Army? Wasn't he affiliated with the Marine Corps? Basically, the question is, what was Sousa's military background? Well, I can do that by saying that he was born here in Washington, D.C. in November of 1854. He grew up just a few blocks from the Capitol. He was born on G Street down in Southeast, very close to the Marine Barracks. His father, Juan Antonio Sousa, was a Spanish man of Portuguese descent. He was a trombone player. He came to this country in the late 1840s, served in the Navy Band up in Brooklyn, and then came down to Washington and got a job as a trombonist and fifer in the United States Marine Band. Within a few years, his son, John Philip, was born, and Sousa grew up there in Southeast Washington. He was a very good, right from the beginning, a very good musician, started early. He was a violinist. That was his instrument. One day he was up practicing his violin, and there was a circus in town, and the leader of the circus orchestra, of the band, was going by the house there and heard a very fine fiddle player in there and knocked on the door, and a very young 13-year-old Sousa answered the door, and he said, who's playing violin in the house? It sounds very good. And he said, well, it was me. I was practicing. And he said, well, how would you like to join the circus? Well, you can imagine for a 13-year-old boy, the answer is pretty easy for that. He said, I certainly would. He said, well, your parents will probably be against it, so why don't you get up early in the morning and meet me down at Constitution and 8th Street or something, and you can join the circus. Well, he said, and don't tell anyone. Well, Sousa said, like all 13-year-old boys, he had to tell his best friend, who was the next-door neighbor, whose mother was the best friend of Mrs. Sousa. You get the story. So Mr. Sousa's father wakes him up early in the morning and says, put on your best clothes this morning, Philip. And so they have breakfast. He doesn't say anything, and he says, let's take a little walk. And so from the house there on 7th Street over, they walk up to 8th Street, take a right, 3 blocks down, take a left. The next thing he knows, John Philip Sousa, 13 years old, is in the office of the Commandant of the Marine Corps, being enlisted in the United States Marine Band as an apprentice musician. And they had that. It was an apprenticeship program, basically, for young musicians, generally children of the men in the band. And Sousa spent his entire, basically his high school years as a musician in the United States Marine Band. He learned more about music and went to school still and all of that. I'll jump ahead now for the military time. He gets out of the service. He's touring the country as a very popular conductor of light operas, writing operas, that thing, playing his violin, all of that stuff. His father finds out that the leader of the Marine Band is getting the boot. he's had some problems with the Marine Corps. And so Sousa's father had done some housework and some fixing and stuff like that around the commandant's office. And he says, I hear the leader of the Marine band's getting the heave-ho. He said, you know, my son is doing very well out on the road with these shows and stuff. You should take a look at him as a possible replacement for the leader of the Marine band. The telegram comes to Sousa in St. Louis in 1880, I think, and says, if you'd like it, the leader of the Marine band job is open. Come back to Washington. So Sousa takes that. From then until 1892, he serves 5 presidents as conductor of the United States Marine Band, gets out, organizes his own professional concert band in 1892. By the end of the 1890s, America looks like we're going to go to war with Spain. So Sousa talks to the Army, and the Army talks to Sousa about coming in as a commissioned officer, as a bandmaster in the Army. Now, any of you who have grown up here remember Washington summers, you know, that back in Sousa's time, everyone got typhoid fever of one sort or another. Well, Sousa caught that as a child. And he was going to come in as a captain in the United States Army as a bandmaster, and his typhoid flu came back. And so he was hoping that would pass so that he could report for active duty as a bandmaster in the Army. But as you know, it was a very short war. So the war was over by the time he was better, but the Army at that time, even the colonel that had worked out this agreement with Sousa to come in, he says, well, as far as I'm concerned, you're an honorary Army bandmaster. So in a sense, he would have been one of the first, if not the first, commissioned officer in the United States Army. And that would have been his first commission also, because he served in the Marine Band as basically a sergeant major. World War I rolls around. 66-year-old John Philip Sousa realizes that America's going to war. It's not only going to be a war with Germany, it's going to be a world war. He enlists in the United States Navy at the age of 66, is commissioned to lieutenant, goes out to the Great Lakes Naval Training Center out near Chicago, and organizes a 300-piece Navy band out there that travels the United States. Those of a certain age will remember in World War II, we used to call them victory bonds. You know, you buy a bond and help win the war. During World War I, those were called Liberty Loan. You were making a loan to the country for liberty. And so Sousa and his 300-piece Jackie band toured throughout the United States and Canada, raising money for the Liberty Loan. And during his time, you figure this is World War I, his band alone raised over $21 million for the war effort. And at 66 years old, Sousa marched every single parade with that band. And I met players who played in that World War I band that said, it was awfully inspiring to see that 66-year-old band there with his sword marching at the head of the band for every parade like that. So he served, if you count the Army thing as sort of an honorary thing, he served in what was then all 3 branches of the armed forces that way. He would have served in the Air Force, there just wasn't one, so. Yes, sir. Of the World War I Jackie band? No. Sousa had kind of a love-hate relationship with the recording industry. His band made literally thousands of records for the Victor Recording Company. Remember the old RCA dog and all that stuff? And he made lots of money with that. His band made well over 1,000 recordings for Victor, and in his lifetime, he only conducted, on record, 6 recordings. His idea about the recording industry was, he said, if we get too involved in this recording business, it's going to kill live performances. People are going to sit home and listen to the phonograph and not come hear my concerts that way. I think he was sort of right in a sense, in that sense, somewhat prophetic. But that band did not record. No, that band didn't
Loras?
record. Yeah.
One question following on that recording question. You've shared with me some of the history Sousa had with the fledgling U.S. Army band, Pershing Zone. Could you just share a little bit about that history?
Sure. Well, by the time of World War I, let me take that back just a little bit farther. By 1900, the New York Times, now this is 10 years into Sousa's career as a professional bandmaster that toured the country. The New York Times said that Mr. Sousa's face was more recognizable to people in the United States than the President of the United States. And that was true. And he did it the old-fashioned way. He did it in person. So by the time General Pershing decides he's over in Europe, he hears this wonderful Band de la Garde Républicaine, the French Garde Republican Band, which at the time was considered one of the great bands in the world. It was a very, very well-equipped symphonic band that also marched also. But Pershing heard this band and was just bowled over by the quality of it and how it inspired not only the troops, but civilians. And he thought, you know, I don't have anything like that in my army. I need one of those. So Pershing gave the order to organize and equip a United States Army band. Well, within the first few years of that, Sousa was involved very much talking to Congress because he felt as though the service bands, particularly the Army band, because it was brand new at the time, he said, you're not going to find quality bandmasters for this thing if you don't give them some rank. You're not going to attract quality conductors to come in that way. So he testified extensively to Congress, saying that our bands are becoming second rate to the European bands because, you know, the leaders are just lieutenants and captains and that. These are the top men of their field. They have to be rewarded that way. So he was very involved that way. Basically the second leader, there was a man who organized the Army band, but the man who got the Army band going and was its conductor for many years was a man named Captain William Stannard was his name. And you might see his picture out in the lobby and some of those pictures out there. He and Sousa were very good friends, and Sousa had a great deal of respect for Stannard as a musician and as an Army musician and as an Army officer that way. So the Pan American Union here in town, that kind of pretty building that's right next to DAR Constitution Hall, they were trying to organize a lot of back and forth between South America and America, so they started importing a lot of South American and Spanish music. And they contacted Captain Stannard at that time, and there was a period of 20 years where the Army band was pivotal in bringing in South American music and playing it for Americans here so that they heard it for the first time. If you look at the Stannard programs at that time, at least half of the programs were all of these special pieces that were brought in for the Army band to play. And Sousa was very impressed with that and borrowed a lot of music from the Army band that way. This same Pan American Union in 1929 got word that there was going to be a big World's Fair in Seville, Spain in 1929. And they thought it would be wonderful for the United States Army band to go over for this World's Fair representing America, not only North America, but South America because of all this music they were playing. And because of Mr. Sousa's respect and love for the Army band and for Captain Stannard, Franklin Adams, who was head of the Pan American Union, asked Sousa if he would compose a special march for the Army band, written specifically for the Army band to take over to Seville, Spain. So he wrote La Flor de Sevilla, which is sort of nice in a sense also because Sousa's father was born in Seville, Spain. But he wrote a little quote underneath the title of this march, and it's basically in translation, it says, "He who has not seen Seville has not seen beauty." And that was a phrase that his father used all the time. So Sousa wrote this march specifically for the Army band, came down to Washington here. They had a big send-off for the Army band to go over to Spain to play this World's Fair over at the brand new McKinley High School downtown. And the other service bands came over and played also for this concert as a big send-off for the Army band. Mr. Sousa came down and conducted the first performance of his march for the Army band with the Army band. And then when the Army band took the train up to New York to get on the SS Leviathan to go across, he decided he'd give the Army band a big send-off, so he talked to Jimmy Walker, who was his friend, the mayor of New York City, and said, let's go down and send off the Army band in style. So they come up in their limousine. There's the Army band going on the Leviathan, and so the musicians get out their instruments, and Mr. Sousa conducts La Flor de Sevilla. So that's another connection with the Army band that way. Yeah?
You mentioned that Sousa traveled a great deal.
Yeah.
Did he have a wife and family?
He did.
So,
surprisingly.
Loras, just to repeat the question to the
sure.
audience, the question was, did Sousa have a wife and family?
As show business marriages go, his was pretty good. You know, I'll say that. No, he had a loving wife. He had 3 children, a son, John Philip Jr., a daughter, Jane Priscilla, and Helen. And you have to understand, when he went out on the road in 1892, he toured from 1892 until he died in 1932. The last tour was in the fall of 1931. And during that time, those 39 years, the band played well over 16,000 concerts. Now, there probably wasn't a town in America that was large enough to support a concert that didn't at one time in that 39 years have the Sousa band play there. But he also, at the turn of the century, took his band to Europe on several European tours. And at that time, he really was what the papers called him was the Pied Piper of patriotism, or he was an ambassador of Americanism. He brought American music. You know, we were a young country at that time, and Europe particularly didn't have too much respect for American artistic quality. They thought we were kind of hillbillies and rednecks and stuff. And so he really did a great deal to alert Europe that good things were happening in Europe, or good things were happening in the United States. By 1911, he takes a 65-piece concert band on a tour literally around the world. It took well over a year to do it, and never before in the history of music had anyone taken an ensemble that size and played so many concerts and covered so many miles that way. And when the tour was all done, he even made a profit on it, so he was very happy about that. But he toured, he told the newspapers, even as he got old, he said, when you hear of Sousa retiring, you'll hear of Sousa dead. So, and that he literally did. He died in the saddle. He was conducting up in Reading, Pennsylvania, conducted the band, and the last piece he conducted was the Stars and Stripes Forever, went to a banquet, went back to his hotel room, and died in his sleep. So it was a good life.
To follow up on the question about his family, did his children or grandchildren follow in his footsteps?
No. He asked if any of the Sousa children were musical, basically, or went into music. No, his son was in the automotive industry and very successful. John Philip Sousa III decided to organize a dance band down in Palm Beach, Florida, and went down there, and within 3 months, he was back in New York, dead broke, working in the mailroom at Time magazine. So no, they were not and that happens a lot in those families.
A couple questions. One is, could you talk a little about the movie, Star-Spangled Banner?
Oh, yeah.
How faithful or unfaithful that was?
He asked about the Clifton Webb movie, the big 20th Century Fox movie. It's a wonderful movie. Is it accurate? No, it's Hollywood. And Sousa's biographer, Paul Byerly, could tell you all of the things that are wrong in the movie, and yet I'd go visit Paul out in Ohio and put the DVD of the film in and watch it, in that last scene where the band is marching down the mall in Washington, D.C. here with sort of the ghost of Sousa, and I look over and Paul is crying, But it's the one thing I think that is unfair about that movie is Clifton Webb, and he wouldn't have known this, he played Sousa in the movie, played him as sort of a stiff, kind of rigid sort of fellow, and he wasn't at all that way. He had a very, very dry sense of humor. He was a very popular actor or luncheon speaker and that. He wrote comic operas. He wrote well over 12 comic operas. So he was a nice man, a gentleman.
Loras, maybe time for just one more short
Sure.
question here.
Historic trivia. I wonder if you could heard when President Nixon took a trip to, what was it, Jordan? You know about
It was in the Middle East.
The question was about President Nixon visiting Jordan.
Yep. President Nixon loved music. He was a fine musician, an excellent musician, played fine piano and that, and he liked Sousa music. His favorite music was Richard Rodgers' Victory at Sea. But he liked Sousa music. But as his presidency sort of headed towards the end there, one of the pieces that mysteriously vanished from all of the service band's folders at that time was the Washington Post March. And so Nixon thought at the end of his, he's desperately trying to hang on to things, and he decides to make a trip to, was somewhere, Egypt, Jordan, somewhere in the Middle East, and he was going to try to rejuvenate his presidency that way. And he gets there, the plane lands, and the Jordanian, I'm not sure, but the Jordanian band is there ready to play as he steps out of the airplane, and first step comes out, and what do they play but the Washington Post March? And that was sort of the death knell, I think, for the Nixon presidency. But yeah.
Well, thank you, Loras.
Oh yeah. Well, very quickly, you're in for a real treat tonight. I've listened and dealt with this music for well over 30 years, and I say this from the bottom of my heart. I have never heard this music played with more taste, elegance, and artistry than you will hear tonight with the U.S. Army Band. This has been such a revelation, so you're in for a real treat. Enjoy the concert and enjoy these wonderful musicians.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. I'm Sergeant First Class Dave Brown, your announcer for this evening's program. If you are a music fan, you are in for a great concert. If you are a John Philip Sousa fan, you are in for a unique treat. And now please welcome our conductor, the director of the United States Army Concert Band, Lieutenant Joel Dubois. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to tonight's program featuring the United States Army Concert Band performing a special tribute concert to the founding father of American music, John Philip Sousa, who was arguably the most successful and most famous American musician of all time, and one of the most famous the world has ever known. John Philip Sousa's achievements and lasting influence were unknown before his time, unparalleled during his career, and are unlikely to ever be repeated. We opened with a very familiar tune composed 125 years ago this month, Sousa's iconic Thunderer March. Now we turn to the customary beginning of any Army band concert, the playing of our national anthem. During our first 150 years, the United States of America had no official anthem. Many patriotic songs competed for national prominence over the years, including Hail Columbia and My Country, 'Tis of Thee. When time came for America to choose an official anthem, advocates of each song drummed up support for their favorite one, but ultimately it was John Philip Sousa's vote that won the day. After all, if it was good enough for Sousa, then it was good enough for America and good enough for President Herbert Hoover, who designated the Star-Spangled Banner as our national anthem on the 3rd of March, 1931. So now please rise and join as the United States Army Band performs John Philip Sousa's very own arrangement of our national anthem. Although we know him as the March King, John Philip Sousa composed in nearly every known genre, including light operas, show tunes, popular songs, and he even wrote a couple of books. Sousa composed dozens of musical suites with various themes, which he would jot down in a notebook as inspirations came to him. Tonight, we feature a three-movement suite composed in 1922. The first movement is entitled The Genial Hostess, whom Sousa described as graciousness personified. It was an event to be her guest at a dance or dinner. Second, The Campfire Girls. Sousa described the scene like this: drum beats steal softly from over the hills. The campfire girls are approaching. The girls unstrap their blankets and spread them on the ground, and behold the stars in the heavens. The twilight shadows deepen into the night. A clear voice of one maiden is heard, accompanied by a ukulele. The strain is caught up by all the girls as the sweet voice intones softly the closing cadence of the song. The campfire girls are lulled to slumber. And finally, the third movement, which Sousa described as saying she was an adorable young thing, bobbed hair, bright-eyed, and the embodiment of joyous youth, a lively flapper. Here are three movements in the suite from the leaves of Sousa's notebook. 2 weeks from today marks the 160th anniversary of John Philip Sousa's birth just a few miles from here on G Street in southeast Washington. Sousa's parents were immigrants. Sousa's mother was of Bavarian descent, and his father Antonio was born in Spain in the city of Seville, which, according to an old Spanish proverb, he who has not seen Seville has not seen beauty. In 1929, the World's Fair made its way to Seville, Spain, and John Philip Sousa decided to mark the occasion by composing a march for this very ensemble, the United States Army Band. Dedicated to the people of Spain, here is John Philip Sousa's La Flor de Sevilla. At its zenith, John Philip Sousa's band was the most famous musical ensemble in the world. The band's success was due in no small part to Sousa's unique mastery of concert programming. He always seemed to know just how to keep an audience entertained, once challenging a concert crowd by saying, "I dare you to keep your feet still." Sousa's programs were all about variety, and often the printed program differed drastically from what his band actually performed, as Sousa whimsically called out changes from the podium during the show, keeping the musicians on their toes and the audience on the edge of their seats. Sousa also loved to feature soloists who had to be ready to perform without notice and always from memory. When the xylophone rose to popularity as a solo instrument in the 1920s, Sousa hired the best xylophone players in the world, including Joseph Green, Howard Golden, and George Carey, to solo with his world-famous band. Tonight, we'd like to feature our world-famous xylophone soloist in a performance reminiscent in the glory days of Sousa's band and the xylophone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sergeant First Class Harold Summey. I have to say that's a personal first. I've never seen a failure of a percussion implement like that before in a concert. I was trying to think of how to follow that up. I don't think he really dropped the ball, though. He's definitely a professional. You need to know that those mallets are only rated for 10,000 notes apiece, and I think that he just got one too many. But what a professional Sergeant First Class Harold Summey. Man. Well, John Philip Sousa was an avid sportsman and an expert trap shooter. He was responsible for the formation of the American Amateur Trap Shooting Association and served as its very first president. Sousa is also enshrined in the Trap Shooting Hall of Fame in Vandalia, Ohio, in recognition of both his prowess as a trap shooter and his role in bringing national notoriety to the sport. Sousa's second favorite sport was baseball. The Sousa Band even had its own baseball team, for which Sousa himself served as the starting pitcher, presumably because the pitcher's mound was the closest thing to a podium on a baseball field. In 1925, baseball's first commissioner, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, asked Sousa to compose a march in honor of the 50th anniversary of the National League, home of the soon-to-be-crowned world champion San Francisco Giants. Lieutenant asked me to mention the World Series. That's the best I could do. Dedicated to Sousa's second favorite sport, here is the national game. Next, we'd like to perform a few of Sousa's dances. First, a selection that was first introduced by Sousa as an encore during his band's 1924 tour that Sousa wrote after seeing his young granddaughter dancing the popular new step of the day called the Foxtrot. Here is Peaches and Cream. In August 1912, Sousa's daughter Priscilla had just returned from Europe, where the tango was all the rage. Sousa quizzed her about the steps involved, but instead of trying to explain it with words, Priscilla offered to show it. As she danced around the living room for her dad, Sousa was inspired to capture her graceful motions into a piece that he called The Gliding Girl. Our final Sousa dance is based on a syncopated ragtime rhythm. Sousa was instrumental in promoting ragtime in America and later introduced it in Europe at the World's Fair in Paris in 1900. The day after Sousa's band performed, the headline simply said, "Paris is ragtime crazy." Here is Sousa's ragtime entitled "With Pleasure." The United States Field Artillery March was composed in 1917 at the request of Army Lieutenant George Friedlander of the 306th Field Artillery. Friedlander suggested that Sousa incorporate an old Civil War artillery melody known as the caisson song. The origin of the song was not known, but Friedlander assured Sousa that the song was quite old and the composer must be long dead by now. Sousa liked the melody and agreed to include it after changing the rhythm to make it just a little bit more snappy. Sousa recorded the march, and it was an instant hit, selling over 400,000 copies with print sales in the millions. In light of the success, it came as quite a surprise to both Sousa and Lieutenant Friedlander to learn that the song was not an old Civil War melody, but had been composed only 10 years earlier. And even more surprising, despite rumors of his untimely demise, the composer, Lieutenant Edmund Gruber, was still very much alive. Gruber was surprised, too, when he heard of the song's success, but he had never registered the copyright. So sadly, Gruber's only profit from the work came in the form of a free vacuum cleaner that Mrs. Gruber received from the Hoover Vacuum Cleaner Company, who had been using the melody of her husband's song as their national radio jingle. Well, in 1956, the song was immortalized when Gruber's melody was designated as the official song of the United States Army. We're going to perform this march. I need to warn you that there is going to be some simulated gunfire near the end. When you see the cap gun go up, that's when you'll know that it's about to happen. And also, I need to tell you that you will get a chance to stand for the official Army song later in tonight's concert, but for now, keep your seats and enjoy John Philip Sousa's famous setting of the U.S. Field Artillery March. Well, it's better as a military song than a vacuum song, I'm sure. Well, right now, we'd like to take a moment to make a special recognition of a member of the band. He grew up just down the road in Fairfax and attended Fairfax High School. When he was a student, he studied the saxophone with two of the former principal saxophonists with the Army Band. And just a few years after that, in 1980, he joined the band where he has performed as our principal saxophonist for many years and finished his career as our concert band element leader. After 34 years of faithful and devoted service to the United States Army Band and a grateful nation, tonight he performs with us for the final time. He is joined on stage by his son, Ricky, and his daughter, Natalie. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us as we say thanks to Sergeant Major Rick Perrell. Well, Sousa's lifelong dream was not to be the March King, but rather to become the American version of Gilbert and Sullivan. He was a pioneer of the American musical, and by the late 1890s, he had 3 hit musicals running on Broadway, including his most famous one, El Capitan. Tonight, we feature 2 of Sousa's most memorable vocal duets, performing Sweetheart I'm Waiting and I've Made My Plans for Summer. Please welcome Sergeant First Class Promotable Leanne Hinton and Staff Sergeant Matthew Heil.
Sweetheart, I'm waiting, waiting to hold thee, waiting to clasp thee in love's close embrace. Hasten, my true heart, let me enfold thee, let me again, love, gaze on thy face. Hope meets despair with doubt and with trembling. Dark is the night and dreary the day. Tell me, my darling, without dissembling, tell me your heart is mine forever.
Sweetheart, I'm dreaming, dreaming of you, love, dreaming of days so beauteous, so bright. A man that I met who was handsome, like dashing, like strong as a fellow should be. I met him whilst riding the white way, the bright way. I stopped when he came up to me. I could not resist it. I said, please excuse me. Say but the word and you never will lose me. Please don't forget I am of the smart set.
May I call when the summer is here?
I said nay, on your way. I've made my plans for the summer. I'm dreaming of happy days when I hear the roll of the drummer, the music the big band plays, with wooing and cooing at twilight and shooting the shoots after dawn. From me to you, that is what I'll do down at Luna Park.
I met her again in the roaming while gloaming along on the silvery sand. She seemed very happy to meet me and greet me and gave me her soft little hand. I said, can't we marry? There's something about you, something that tells me I can't live without you.
Well, I replied, give me time to decide. Will you call me when summer is gone?
I said, nay, on your way. I've made my plans for the summer. I'm dreaming of happy days when I hear the roll of the drummer, the music the big band plays, with wooing and cooing at twilight and shooting the shoots after dark. Me to you, that is what I'll do down at Luna Park.
I've made my plans for the summer. I'm dreaming of happy days
When I hear the roll of the drummer, the music the big band plays, with wooing and cooing at twilight and shooting the shoots after dark. From me to you, that is what I'll do down at Luna Park.
At the dawn of the 20th century, a new art form was born in America known as motion pictures. And from the very beginning, it was clear that John Philip Sousa loved the movies. He was friends with most of the movie stars of the day and a contemporary and colleague of Thomas Edison, whose production studio created the first silent films, which were often accompanied by music from a live orchestra. Sousa always dreamed that he would someday be called upon to compose a grand score to accompany a film. Curiously, the call never came. But undaunted and in typical Sousa fashion, he decided to create his own scenarios and composed music for films that he himself dreamed up. Tonight, we perform the third movement of a suite which musically describes a joyous dance, and the movement had many titles, as Sousa was prone to change the title to suit his mood. Sometimes he called it Pavlova at the New York Hippodrome, or The Cabaret Dancers, or the published title, Balance All and Swing Partners. At the time of his death in 1932, Sousa had well over 500 active requests for new marches. Sousa never took money for a commission, but insisted that he had to have the right inspiration before he would commit a note to paper or write a new march. Some of Sousa's marches were composed in just a few days, and others took years to finish, and some were left incomplete, including our next march, which was the last composition that Sousa worked on before his death. In 2003, the Library of Congress commissioned American composer and arranger Stephen Bullock to take Sousa's final sketches and scoring materials to create this march. The piece received its premiere in the library's Great Hall and a performance by the Virginia Grand Military Band conducted by Loras Schissel for the members of Congress and the library's Madison Council. Loras is here with us. He's been with us for the last couple of weeks. He's an absolute gentleman to work with. His knowledge of Sousa is above and beyond anything that you could imagine, and we are honored to have him here with us tonight, and we would like to ask him to honor us by taking the baton and conducting this march. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome archivist, musicologist, and Sousa expert, Mr. Loras Schissel. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our leader and commander, Colonel Thomas Palmatier, for a special recognition.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And Lieutenant Dubois instructed me that I was now supposed to speak a minute and a half about Loras Schissel, but I'm in charge and I got the microphone, so I'll talk about whatever I want to talk about. Okay. You got to hear a very little bit about Sergeant Major Rick Perrell a little bit ago. He will actually have his retirement ceremony in January, and I won't be able to be there because I'll be retired by then. So I won't have the opportunity to share with the people there a little story about him that I'm going to share with all of you and the people watching on the internet and the people who will watch for years and years to come on YouTube. When his predecessor was retiring as element leader of the concert band, brought Sergeant Major Perrell into the office and said, okay, congratulations. And he said, congratulations about what? And I said, you are the senior soldier in the concert band. You are going to be the element leader. And he sat there and he kind of looked around, looked down his shoes, and he said, is there any way I can talk you out of this? And I said, no, you can't talk me out of it. And he said, are you sure? You sure? Can I talk you out of that somehow? I said, no. And he said, well, I don't really think I can do a very good job of that. And I said, well, I think you can. And he said, yeah, but what if I can't? And I said, well, if you don't, then we'll be sitting here in the office, and I'll tell you you're fired. You know? So, well, to say that he has done a good job is an understatement. It is a rare military leader that can blend that can blend the ability to take care of people and take care of the mission. It's a rare military leader that can keep focus on the important things and keep driving forward. He has done everything that this amazing concert band could have ever asked of him, and he has done everything that Pershing's Own could have ever asked of him as a leader. And I can only sum it up by telling you kind of a little private confidential thing, because his retirement award was submitted to me today, and I get to submit it then to our commanding general for, I'm sure, approval. And I wrote on his retirement award, this is one of the finest sergeants major I have ever served with. And I really mean that. So, Rick, you didn't get fired. And you truly have been one of the finest element leaders and one of the greatest sergeants major I've ever served with. Now, later on, I'm sure Lieutenant Dubois is going to tell you all about our website and stuff like that, but when you go to usarmyband.com, click on the YouTube symbol there, because not only will you find this performance, every performance in Brooker Hall, you will also find our entire discography is being posted on YouTube, to include a recent release, a collection of a playlist. You know, we don't do albums anymore, but it's an album, if you will, there on YouTube called New American Masters, recorded by this incredible group of musicians here on stage. So I hope you will take some time to listen to that, Made in America, and the hundreds and hundreds of other recordings that they have there for free for you to listen to at your convenience. And you can watch this performance, as well as a couple weeks ago, Mr. Schissel joined us and deconstructed, if you will, 4 Sousa marches. And, you know, I've been in Army bands for 37 years, so I played a Sousa march or two. And I learned more about Sousa marches in that hour and a half than I learned in the previous 37 years of my career. So if you haven't seen that, go ahead and watch that as well. You'll see that already almost 2,200 people have watched that show, and we found out that there were actually viewing parties around the world. In Korea and Japan, there were entire bands that gathered to watch that. Recently, there was a group of Latvian bandmasters gathered, and they had a band conference, and they used that show. They played that as their feature presentation. So it's gaining. A lot of people are realizing what a hidden treasure that Loras Schissel is. At the Library of Congress, he has kept the flame alive for this fabulous music and the legacy of John Philip Sousa. But he has also been a great, great contributor to military bands and to music in general and music in America for the past several decades. I mean, this is a guy that for years I've been opening up pieces of music and seeing a picture of Loras Schissel and going, wow, I love his arrangements. I wish I could get to meet him sometime, and there he is. So we're really honored and pleased to have him here with us, and I would ask if you would allow us to recognize him formally.
Headquarters, Department of the Army. The Commander's Award for Public Service is presented to Mr. Loras J. Schissel for exemplary achievement while serving with the United States Army Band during its Celebrate Sousa events on October 9 and 23, 2014. Mr. Schissel's expertise and assistance were invaluable to the success of the United States Army Band's performance of John Philip Sousa's music and contributed greatly to the education and training of Army musicians and music educators around the world. This award reflects the utmost credit upon himself, the United States Army Band, the United States Army Military District of Washington, the Joint Force Headquarters National Capital Region, and the United States Army. Signed, Thomas H. Palmentier, Colonel, U.S. Army, commanding.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you again for coming this evening, and I hope you're enjoying this program. I hope you've learned something about the U.S. Army Band's, one of the U.S. Army Band's favorite American composers this evening. Like Sousa's band, this ensemble before you is an amazing group of musicians. And just some of the stories that are represented that were mentioned this evening about Sergeant Major Rick Perrell, among others. Just one of the amazing folks up here, soldiers, musicians, just great people, and we have the pleasure of hearing them perform this evening. I hope you've enjoyed that. If you'd like to know more about these folks as well as our organization, I would invite you, like the Colonel said, to visit us at usarmyband.com, usarmyband.com. And while you're on our website, we'd love to hear what you think about our program tonight, as well as what we can do better, how we can serve you, what you'd like to hear as a patron and an audience member of our organization this evening. On that website, you can also, like the Colonel said, take a moment and download free music. We'd also invite you to mark your calendars, please, for November the 3rd at 10 a.m. So set your watch, set your phone, set your alarm at home. But at that point, at that moment, that's the date and the time when tickets will become available for the American Holiday Festival concert. Again, you'll have to go online to our website to get those. This year, our holiday concert will be happening at Constitution Hall on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, December 5th, 6th, and 7th. So free tickets are available starting at 10 a.m. on Monday, November 3rd, while supplies last. Please visit usarmyband.com. So as you've heard before, maybe in the pre-concert chat or during the concert this evening, Sousa was a strong supporter of our nation's military. Between his enlistment in the Marine Corps, his leadership of the Marine Corps Band, his attempt to join the U.S. Army, and then finally his distinguished service in the Naval Marine Corps, the Naval Center Training Center Band in Great Lakes, Michigan, he's had a distinguished career of support for our nation's military. And this evening, the U.S. Army Band honors his military legacy, as well as your military legacy, by performing the service songs of the United States Armed Forces. So we're going to perform the service songs in this order. First, we'll do the Coast Guard, then the Air Force, then the Navy, the Marine Corps, and then the best one. And we hope that we'd love for you to stand if you're able during your song, if you or any member of your family have served in one of those armed services, because family members serve too, and we want to honor you and your family for your legacy and contribution to our nation. And if the wounds of the battlefield or the passage of time make it difficult for you to stand, just give us a wave, and we will see you and salute you. In fact, all of America will see you and salute you, because this is your Armed Forces salute.
Our leader and commander, Colonel Thomas Palmentier, we'd like to thank you for joining us for tonight's concert. We truly hope that you have enjoyed it. We close our concert tonight the way that we always close, by performing John Philip Sousa's most famous composition. Wish I could do that. Where was I? We close tonight by playing John Philip Sousa's most famous composition. Someone once asked Sousa, who influenced you to compose the Stars and Stripes Forever? And before the question was hardly asked, Sousa replied, God. And I say that with all reverence. I was in Europe and I got a cablegram that my manager had passed away. I rushed to Paris and then to England and then sailed for America. On board the steamer, I had not much to do, and as I walked up and down the deck back and forth, a mental band began playing the same themes over and over again in my mind. And day after day as I walked, the theme persisted, crashing into my very soul. Sousa's ship arrived in America on Christmas Day, 1896, whereupon he quickly committed the theme to paper, creating a national treasure. Designated by an act of Congress as the official march of the United States of America, here is John Philip Sousa's iconic The Stars and Stripes Forever.